What is a retcon? According to Google, a retcon is a new piece of information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. In layman's terms, it's a new piece of information presented to a story, usually in a sequel, that conflicts with the already established lore. An infamous example of a retcon occurred in the Spider-Man trilogy. In the original Spider-Man, the character who kills Uncle Ben is an unnamed burglar. However, in Spider-Man 3, this unnamed burglar character is revealed to be, or retconned into becoming Flint Marko, another character, one that, as you can obviously see, was not in the original Spider-Man. While retcons aren't necessarily a bad thing, they can be quite jarring and warrant further explanation. Acceleracers is no stranger to retcons, these of which have no in-universe explanations for having occurred. While Acceleracers obviously exist in the same continuity of World Race, Acceleracers retroactively made changes to the lore by replacing both the Clip organization and the Scrim Corporation into the racing drones and the silencers respectively, as well as undergoing other, miscellaneous changes. Today, I want to discuss these retcons in detail along with their implications. What effect do these retcons have in our story, and why would they even be made in the first place? With the help of my own deductions, a certain series of articles, and an AMA conducted with the man at the head of Highway 35 himself, Jeff Gomez, I might just be able to find out. I welcome you all to the questionable retcons of Acceleracers. In the World Race, the Clip organization was a group of robots led by Galorum. Their aim? To infiltrate the World Race and obtain the Wheel of Power. In Acceleracers, the racing drones were a group of test robots created by the Accelerons, which of whom later went rogue and aimed to destroy their creators. This is one of the few retcons Acceleracers attempts to explain canonically. In one of the Meet the Driver special features, it is said that the racing drone stole the Wheel of Power from Hot Wheels City. This can be seen in the beginning of Ignition, meaning Hot Wheels City exists in the Acceleracers continuity. From this test document, we are told that there was a supposed drone takeover, in which the racing drones took over Hot Wheels City, where the Wheel of Power was located, which was then converted into their headquarters. This brings up the question, where did the racing drones reside before taking over Hot Wheels City? In the Ruins Realm micro episode, it is said that the racing drones hibernated in the Ice Realm until their quote, time had come.
Our time has come.
But how did the racing drones exit the Ice Realm if the Wheel of Power hadn't even begun opening the racing realms yet? While this racing drone's lore in itself does make sense, it conflicts with the existence of the Clip organization. The reason the Clip organization weren't the ones seen hibernating in the Ice Realm is because they no longer exist. Not like they were disbanded or anything, but they were removed from the continuity and replaced by the racing drones. This change of the Clip organization into the racing drones has even more implications, since, in the World Race, Kurt had formerly been a spy for the Clip organization. However, in the Acceleracers continuity, Kurt would now have been a spy for the racing drones. Acceleracers even cleverly dodges this distinction where, in this conversation, Karma mentions that Kurt was formerly a spy for Galorum, and not for the Clip organization, completely avoiding the need to acknowledge a retcon.
Speaking of sides, I heard you used to be on the wrong one. That you were a spy for Galorum.
There isn't much known about the Scrim Corporation. Even in the World Race, the only film where the Scrim Corporation has any prominence, the corporation is barely mentioned. Based on my own deductions, the Scrim Corporation was a front for the US government used to recruit drivers to reach the Wheel of Power. I say this because Major Wheeler seems to have some type of involvement in Scrim, showing up at the end of the World Race and talking to Dr. Tesla.
I know all about it. These two told me everything.
In Acceleracers, the Silencers were a secret organization whose goal was to learn as much about the racing realms as they could, win the Accelechargers, and obtain the Wheel of Power. The two are very similar, much more similar than that of Clip and the racing drones. The removal of Scrim for the Silencers has a profound effect on the origins of characters like Dr. Tesla and Gig. Since Dr. Tesla was the founder and president of the Scrim Corporation, would that make him the founder and president of the Silencers? Tesla's backstory went from being head of a presumably large organization to being an employee of the Silencers. Originally, I thought he was the leader of the Silencers, but this can't be so, as it seems like Major Wheeler is a president, or at least a leader of them. Gig being a spy for the Silencers also brings up a couple of oddities. Had he always been a spy since the World Race? I don't think so, as Gig shows absolutely no signs of malicious intent for the entirety of the film. I presume that Gig had no ulterior motives in the World Race, but when it came time for Acceleracers, he was given a whole new purpose.
He was following orders from the Silencers.
On to miscellaneous retcons. In the World Race, there's no mention of Vert having a mother. Neither Vert or his father ever say anything about or pertaining to her. Yet all of a sudden, in Acceleracers, Vert has a mother. Of course, Vert had to have always had a mother, but she wasn't mentioned until Acceleracers. I presume that Vert's mother was never intended to be included in the story, but was later added to Acceleracers in order to flesh out Vert's backstory and provide a darker narrative. In an effort to remedy these retcons, in 2005, prior to the release of Ignition, Mattel released a hyperpod bundled with a DVD titled Recruiting the Best. This was a 30-minute recap of the significant events of the World Race, made to catch up those who hadn't seen it prior to seeing Acceleracers. It also features audio commentary from Burt Wheeler. Since both Clip and Scrim don't exist in Acceleracers, I assumed that neither of them would be mentioned here. Upon finishing the special, I noticed how, in audio commentary from Vert, the Clip organization is now referred to as the Racing Drones.
Galorum and her racing drones would stop at nothing to get the Wheel of Power.
Scrim, however, is still mentioned.
I'm the founder and president of the Scrim Corporation.
Although, in this case, I think it couldn't have been avoided, as that piece of dialogue was integral to introducing Dr. Tesla as a character and established figure. This establishes that, in the Acceleracers continuity, Clip has been changed into the Racing Drones, and Scrim has been changed into the Silencers. Hot Wheels World Race was created by Mattel in collaboration with Starlight Runner Entertainment. Head of this company was and still is Jeff Gomez, someone who played a large role in creating Highway 35 and writing the script to the World Race. To my surprise, World Race went through a lot of changes during its development. This happens a lot while developing a property, whether it be from focuses shifting or higher-ups requesting changes being made. In this case, it was the latter. Mattel had Jeff Gomez change his original ending to the World Race, which would have delved into Galorum and Clip's true motivations. In an article where Jeff Gomez recounts his experiences creating Highway 35, he says, "I was initially curious about why Mattel altered my ending to the miniseries," which explained the motivations of the villains and filled in the audience on some backstory. Of course, both of these were addressed when 8 additional hours of Hot Wheels animated movies and tons of downloadable animated content were created for the Hot Wheels Acceleracers campaign that came with its own toy line in 2005. Mattel, perhaps smartly, didn't want to paint itself into a corner. Mattel wanted to leave the self-contained story of the World Race open to potential sequels, which at this point, there were no plans for. In an AMA conducted by Acceleracers community figurehead Dos Mattel, Jeff Gomez would comment further on this topic. User Eric Pixel asked if Jeff Gomez was surprised when Mattel decided to make a sequel series to the World Race, or if it was something that was planned or expected. Gomez would respond by saying, "We were surprised. After all the work we put in the World Race, Mattel seemed to move on and was not very communicative. Then suddenly, we were asked to review some materials and even make some suggestions around Acceleracers, and we were shocked because we didn't even know that Highway 35 did so well that it warranted a sequel. We were thrilled that this was the case, but a bit disappointed that we were not more creatively involved with the second series." Mattel, unfortunately, ended their collaboration with Starlight Runner Entertainment, and would go on to commission a sequel to the World Race with another company, by the name of Rainmaker Entertainment. Mattel had no obligation to Starlight Runner. We were work for hire, and they moved on to Acceleracers and Battle Force without us. We would not see any royalties or receive any further acknowledgement. There has been a good deal of turnover there, so I don't imagine many people even remember our contributions. To tell you the truth, it kind of hurt. Besides having Starlight Runner review over some materials and offer some suggestions for a potential sequel, Starlight Runner would have little to do with a World Race sequel, which is very unfortunate, as Gomez seemed to have very large plans for a series and its characters. Referring back to the AMA, Jeff Gomez said, "I always design my worlds to have sequels." When asked what a World Race sequel from his company would have looked like, Jeff Gomez responded by saying, "Acceleracers by Starlight Runner would have been more about how Vert and company dealt with a race of beings that was divided upon itself. Because their ways of expressing speed were ultimately destructive to Earth, our heroes would have to figure out how to resolve this." In another response in the AMA, Jeff Gomez would go on saying, "I'm the first person who can say, I don't like Acceleracers, and have some legitimate reasons for that, because I created many of those characters in that story world, and Mattel ran away with it and created something else. But guess what? I knew exactly what was in my contract, and knew that they had the right to do what they did. I created something that lasted for 15 years. It's amazing to me that you're all still talking about it, so I could look at Acceleracers with fresh eyes and appreciate it for what it is." Jeff Gomez isn't very fond of Acceleracers. He had a story in mind for his world and characters, yet Mattel would go on to continue it without him. I liken the situation to Stephen King in the film adaptation of his novel, The Shining. The Shining by Stanley Kubrick strayed far away from its source material. While this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as the movie is still phenomenal in its own right, it was just not what the original creator had intended. In a question from user Cooley588, they ask if Jeff Gomez was happy with the direction Acceleracers was taken by Rainmaker Entertainment. They understand World Race was never intended to have a sequel, so they're interested if Jeff Gomez thinks the following movies were within his vision for the original. Jeff Gomez responded by saying, "I was initially not entirely happy with the direction of Acceleracers. The selection of which characters to keep and which to delete was a bit frustrating. I thought the female characters, especially Lonnie, should have been more in the thick of the action. Some of what was created did not follow the themes and mythology of what Starlight Runner had invented. This was something I brought up in the AMA. I asked if the racing drone story in Acceleracers, being created by the Accelerons and such, was what he originally intended on explaining in the World Race. To which Jeff Gomez responded, "The storyline that picked up the threads of our work in Acceleracers was not what we had originally created. The Accelerons were not quite as dark in our work, and there were conflicting factions within them that would have made for interesting mixes and matches for the characters. Some of this is hinted in later episodes of Acceleracers." Moving back to the topic of retcons, user Throw-In Stronghammer asked if the Scrim Corporation and the Silencers are one of the same, also asking about Clip and how he thinks they were disguised for the racing drones to match their supernatural/alien origins. This isn't possible, but Jeff Gomez responded by saying, "Scrim and the Silencers are roughly the same organization, but their motivations and techniques change from our Bible. The Clip were a renegade group of Accelerons that wanted to use some type of speed force to conquer the various racing realms. This confirms my theory of Clip and the racing drones not being one of the same, and by extension, Scrim and the Silencers." Jeff Gomez would proceed to mention these inconsistencies in this comment. "We did point out some inconsistencies that we'd hope they fix, and some were indeed fixed. In the long run, Mattel did the right thing for the most part in my opinion. Keyword, some were indeed fixed." I hope I was able to enlighten you all on the retcons made in Acceleracers. Retcons are a bit of an abstract and confusing topic, so I try to make this as digestible as possible. I think there was enough material in the World Race story world to continue on as it was. Despite this though, the creators of Acceleracers went in an entirely different direction, throwing away what had already been established. I think this was ultimately the right decision, as the racing drones and the Silencers captivated me a lot more than Clip or Scrim ever did. Although, maybe I wouldn't hold the same opinion if Jeff Gomez's original ending for the World Race hadn't been changed. I would have also liked to see his original vision for Acceleracers come to fruition. At least some of the answers he gave in the AMA let us learn about what it would have looked like. What do you think about the retcons made in Acceleracers? Would you have done the same? Make sure to tell me down below. This has been NOLO as fuck. Till next time.